Welcome back to my channel. Liam's miserable future. Caught in Steffy and Hope's war. The bold and the beautiful spoilers reveal that Liam Spencer may have a major dilemma headed his way. During the week of April 27th to May 1st, Steffy Forrester Finnegan is going to put Hope for the future on hold again. So that's when the trouble will start. Hope Logan Spencer may vent to Liam about Steffy pushing her line away formerly again and get some comfort. Liam may give Hope a Vim talk and assure her that effects will work out one way or another. Of course, Katie Logan Spencer could bait Hope down from Forrester Creations and move her to come part of Logan with Deke Sharp. Still, Liam is going to land in the middle of some hostility if so. Hope might act like Steffy should be glad she's gone since she's demurred Hope out of the company ahead. Besides, if Steffy has no use for Hope for the future, what's the point of Hope sticking around? Still, Steffy will inescapably grouch about Hope working for a rival fashion house, especially one that's formerly on the Forresters' bad side. It may leave Steffy calling out Hope's disloyalty and venting her issues with Hope's new line. Hope has been part of the Forrester family for a long time, so Steffy may view this as Katie piggybacking on noteworthy names from their company again. Katie did it with Eric Forrester, John McCook, and may be doing it with Hope next. Indeed, if Steffy stops Hope from using the Hope for the unborn name, Hope could still plan a line that's too analogous for Steffy's taste. It could lead to Steffy complaining to Liam and potentially putting him in an awkward position. Steffy might push Liam to talk some sense into Hope and get her to stand down. Liam could get caught in Hope and Steffy's feud, which is the last place he ever wants to be. In the end, Liam may side with his woman and refuse to talk Hope out of an amazing occasion. It could leave Steffy frustrated and lead to some disunion with Liam too. Liam has been stuck in Steffy and Hope's drama numerous times over the times on B&B, so this should be an unwelcome memorial of the history. The bold and the beautiful spoilers say bad news may be brewing for Liam since he wouldn't be suitable to escape Hope and Steffy's rearmost round of colliding. Liam Spencer stood at the precipice house window long after the ocean had faded into darkness, his reflection gaping back at him like a man he slightly honored, a man torn so deeply between two worlds that neither felt like home presently, and as the weight of everything pressed in on him, the history, the present, and the insolvable future, he realized with a sinking certainty that his life was no longer his own but a battleground in a war that refused to end, a war between Steffy and Hope that had consumed times of love, treason, remission, and heartache, and now hovered to destroy what little remained of his peace. The echoes of their voices still chimed in his cognizance from earlier that day, sharp, emotional, implacable, each word laced with history and pain, and Liam had formerly again set up himself in the center of it all, not as a party by choice but as the prize neither woman was willing to completely relinquish. Indeed, when they claimed they had moved on, indeed when they claimed they were fighting for commodity lesser than him, because deep down Liam knew the verity. They were still fighting over him, over what he represented, over the life that had slipped through all their fritters too numerous times to count. He closed his eyes and let out a slow breath, flashing back how it all began, how love had formerly felt simple and pure before it came complicated by secrets and choices that could no way be undone, and now every decision he made sounded to pull him deeper into a web he couldn't escape. Because choosing one meant losing the other, and losing either of them felt like losing a part of himself he could no way replace. Before, Hope's voice had quivered with a mixture of frustration and vulnerability as she brazened him, asking him how much longer they were supposed to live like this, circling the same emotional ground, pretending that their connection wasn't still there, pretending that the history didn't matter when it easily signified further than anything, and Liam had plotted to answer because the verity was messy and painful. He still loved her, in a way that time and distance had no way completely cancelled, but that love was tangled up with guilt and remorse, and every time he looked at her he saw the life they could have had if effects had been different, if he'd been stronger, if he'd made better choices. And also there was Steffy, who had stood her ground with fierce determination, refusing to let Hope rewrite history or claim a future that Steffy believed she had fought too hard to secure, her eyes blazing with a defensive instinct that extended not only to her family but to the life she had erected, a life that included Liam whether he merited to be there or not, and her words had cut just as deeply, reminding him of the pledges they had made, the children they participated, and the bond that could no way truly be broken no matter how simulated it came. Liam felt like he was being pulled piecemeal. His heart divided in ways that sense could attune, because both women were right in their own ways, both had licit claims on his history and his feelings, and yet neither could offer him a future free of conflict, and that consummation was what scarified him the most, that no matter what he chose, the war would continue reshaping itself, chancing new reasons to enkindle, leaving him trapped in a cycle he couldn't break. He moved down from the window and sat down heavily, running his hands through his hair as the recollection swamped in, moments of happiness that now felt bittersweet, horselaugh that echoed with the knowledge of what came later, and the innumerous times he told himself that effects would be different, that he'd find a way to make it work, that love would be enough to overcome everything, only to find himself right back where he started, caught between two important forces that refused to attend peacefully. What made it worse was the impact on everyone around them, the way their conflict gurgled outward, affecting their families, their children, their musketeers, turning private pain into public drama that no way sounded to end, and Liam abominated that further than anything, abominated that his incapability to resolve his own passions had contributed to a situation that hurt so numerous people, because he'd always wanted to be better than this, to rise above the chaos, to be the kind of man who could make delicate opinions and stand by them, but ever he always ended up scrupling, second, guessing, hoping that time would ever break what he couldn't, and time had only made it more complicated. As the night wore on, Liam's studies turned darker, more introspective, and he began to question whether there was any interpretation of the future that didn't involve misery, whether there was a path forward that didn't bear him to immolate commodity essential, and the more he allowed about it, the more it felt like there was like the veritably nature of his connections with Steffy and Hope made a peaceful resolution insolvable, because their histories were too integrated, their feelings too violent, and their prospects too deeply embedded to simply fade down. He wondered what it would be like to walk down from both of them, to remove himself from the equation entirely, to give them the space to move on without him as a constant point of contention. But indeed, that idea felt defective, because he knew that his absence wouldn't abolish the history or the passions that still dallied, and it wouldn't change the fact that they would always be connected through the lives they had erected together. The verity was, there were no easy answers, no clean breaks, no simple results, only delicate choices and the consequences that came with them, and Liam wasn't sure he'd the strength to face those consequences head-on. The following morning brought no clarity, only more pressure as the fallout from the former day continued to unfold, with both Steffy and Hope refusing to back down, each determined to assert her place in Liam's life, and formerly again he set up himself caught in the middle, trying to navigate a situation that felt decreasingly insolvable, his words precisely chosen but no way relatively enough to satisfy either side, because what they both wanted was certainty, and certainty was the one thing Liam couldn't give. As the battle escalated, feelings ran grandly, allegations were thrown, and old injuries were restarted, and Liam could feel the walls closing in, the pressure mounting, until it felt like he might break under the weight of it all. And in that moment he realized commodity he'd been avoiding for far too long, that his vacillation wasn't just hurting him, it was hurting everyone, and if he didn't find a way to change that, the cycle would continue indefinitely, leaving nothing but damage in its wake. But indeed with that consummation, the path forward remained unclear, because making a choice meant facing the possibility of remorse, of wondering what might have been, of living with the knowledge that he'd caused pain no matter which direction he went. And for Liam, that was the hardest part, the fear that there was no right choice, only different performances of wrong, and that his future, no matter what he decided, would be marked by the consequences of a war he no way truly wanted to fight but could no longer escape. Liam slightly slept, and when morning light crept through the curtains of the precipice house, it felt less like a new morning and more like a harsh limelight exposing everything he'd tried to ignore. Because the verity he carried into that day was heavier than ever. He was running out of time to keep pretending that effects would ever resolve themselves, and yet every instinct in him still defied the kind of decisive action that could permanently alter the course of all their lives. As he sat on the edge of the bed, gaping at his phone, he saw dispatches from both Steffy and Hope, each one detailed but loaded with anticipation, and it struck him how indeed their silence between words spoke volumes, how every commerce had come a test, a moment where he was anticipated to prove commodity he wasn't indeed sure he understood himself presently, and that pressure made it harder, not easier, to find clarity, because rather of hearkening to his own heart, he felt like he was constantly replying, constantly trying to manage the fallout rather than addressing the root of the problem. When he eventually got up and faced the day, The sense of dread followed him, moping in every step, every breath, until he set up himself formally again in the presence of both women who had shaped his life in ways he could no way undo, and the pressure between them was immediate, palpable like a storm staying to break, because neither Steffy nor Hope was willing to pretend presently, neither was interested in maintaining the fragile peace that had only served to delay the ineluctable battle. Hope's eyes were filled with a quiet determination that felt different this time, lower about contending and further about demanding honesty, and when she spoke, her voice carried a steady resoluteness that caught Liam off guard, as she told him that she could and keep living in query, that she demanded to know where she stood not just in his life but in his future, because she refused to be a moping possibility, a what-if that he could return to whenever effects with Steffy came too complicated, and her words hit him hard because they exposed a verity he'd been unintentional to admit, that in numerous ways, he'd kept Hope in that exact position, not out of atrocity but out of fear. Fear of letting go fully, fear of losing commodity that had formerly meant everything to him. Steffy, on the other hand, didn't hide her frustration, her wrathfulness stewing just beneath the face as she challenged both of them, questioning why this discussion was indeed necessary, why the history was being dragged into the present when she believed they had formerly moved forward, and yet indeed as she spoke, there was an turnabout of instability, a recognition that the history had no way truly stayed in the history, that Liam's connection to Hope had no way completely faded no matter how important they tried to bury it, and that consummation only fueled her determination to fight harder, to cover what she saw as hers, to refuse to let history reprise itself. Liam stood between them, feeling the familiar pull in both directions, and for a moment it was nearly inviting, the weight of their prospects, their feelings, their participated history pressing down on him until it felt like he might suffocate under it, and he realized that this was his miserable future laid bare. Not a single disastrous moment, but an ongoing cycle of conflict, a life defined by pressure and undetermined passions, where every day brought a new interpretation of the same struggle, and no matter how important he wanted to believe else, he couldn't see a way out that didn't involve pain. He tried to speak, to find the words that could ever bridge the gap, but everything sounded shy indeed before he said it, because what could he conceivably offer that would satisfy both of them, that would heal times of hurt and confusion, that would give the certainty they both demanded? And in that moment of vacillation, the silence stretched, growing heavier, more rough, until it came clear that his incapability to answer was itself an answer, one that neither woman was willing to accept. Hope's expression shifted, disappointment replacing determination as she shook her head slightly, as if attesting commodity she had formerly begun to suspect, and she told him that his silence was hurting her further than any harsh verity ever could, because it meant he still didn't know what he wanted, and if he didn't know by now, she wasn't sure he ever would, and those words cut deeper than anything differently, because they forced Liam to defy the possibility that she might be right, that his vacillation wasn't temporary but abecedarian, a part of who he was that he couldn't simply change by sheer force of will. Steffy's response was different but no less violent, her frustration boiling over as she demanded that he stop letting the once mandate their present, that he stop allowing Hope to pull him back into a cycle they had formerly lived through too numerous times, and her voice carried a admixture of wrathfulness and despair, because beneath her confidence was a fear she couldn't completely hide, the fear that no matter how important she fought, no matter how strong she tried to be, she might still lose him to commodity she couldn't contend with, commodity embedded in memory and undetermined emotion rather than reality. The battle reached a breaking point, voices raised, feelings discovering over, and Liam felt himself shutting down, retreating inward as the chaos around him came too important to reuse, because this was exactly what he'd stressed, exactly what he'd tried to avoid, and yet it was passing anyway, unfolding in a way that left him feeling helpless to stop it, and as he looked at both of them, he saw not just the women they were now but the performances of them he'd loved in the history, the moments they had participated, the pledges they had made, and it all blurred together into commodity inviting and painful, a memorial that his life wasn't divided into neat chapters, but involved vestments that couldn't be fluently separated. Ultimately, the argument burned itself out, leaving behind a heavy silence that felt nearly worse than the shouting, and one by one they pulled down, not with resolution but with moping pressure, with questions unanswered and feelings undetermined, and Liam was left alone formerly again, standing in the fate of a battle that had no clear winner, only casualties, and as he sank into a prostration washing over He realized that this wasn't just a temporary phase, not just a rough patch they would ultimately get through, but a pattern that would continue unless commodity unnaturally changed, and the intimidating part was that he didn't know what that change demanded to be, or if he was indeed able of making it. As the hours passed and the house grew quiet, Liam's studies turned inward formerly more, circling the same questions, the same dubieties, the same fears, and he began to understand that his miserable future wasn't just about being caught between Steffy and Hope, but about his own incapability to break free from the cycle, to take control of his life in a way that needed courage and conviction rather than vacillation and stopgap. And until he set up that within himself, nothing differently would truly change, no matter how numerous competitions they had, no matter how numerous pledges were made or broken, because at the center of it all was a man who didn't know how to choose, and that, further than anything differently, was the tragedy that would continue to define his life. The days that followed didn't bring relief, they only strengthened the cracks that had formerly begun to resolve Liam's world piecemeal, and what made it indeed harder to bear was the growing sense that everyone around him was starting to see him else, not as the man who formerly tried to do the right thing, but as someone whose incapability to act had come, the veritably source of the chaos he claimed to hate, because in the quiet moments between competitions, when there was no bone differently to condemn and no argument to hide before, Liam could feel the verity settling in with uncomfortable clarity. This wasn't just about being caught between Steffy and Hope presently, it was about the kind of man he'd allowed himself to come, and the cost of that consummation was far heavier than any argument or blameworthiness either woman could throw at him. He set up himself avoiding places he used to go without allowing, avoiding exchanges that might lead back to the same painful questions, indeed avoiding his own reflection at times, because every memorial of his current reality felt like a glass he wasn't ready to face, and yet no matter how important he tried to produce distance, the war between Steffy and Hope followed him, woven into every aspect of his life in ways that made escape insolvable, because it wasn't just external conflict, it had come internal, a constant battle between what he felt, what he stressed, and what he knew he should do but couldn't relatively bring himself to act on. When he saw Hope again, there was a conspicuous shift in her address, a quiet strength that replaced the emotional vulnerability she had shown before, and it unsettled him in a way he hadn't anticipated, because rather of reaching out to him, rather of trying to pull him back into the route they had always participated, she held her ground, speaking to him with a calm detachment that made it clear she was starting to let go, not in a dramatic, final way but in small deliberate way that created space between them, and that space felt heavier than any argument, because it suggested a future where he might no longer be at the center of her world, where he might come just a part of her history rather than a possibility for her future, and the study of that stirred commodity in him, a blend of remorse, fear, and an unforeseen mindfulness of what